Today on Talk Farm to Me, you will meet Sharon Burns-Leader, the co-owner of Bread Alone, a pioneering organic bakery that sells its products at the Union Square Greenmarket and in Whole Foods, pretty much everywhere in the Hudson Valley and in and around New York City. I approached Sharon to give us all some insight into the Union Square Greenmarket that is the focus of Season 6. I wanted to extend the conversation from Episode 1 that featured Michael Hurwitz and Aquilino Cabral and their insights into the marketplace from their roles at GrowNYC. Sharon serves on GrowNYC's Farmer and Community Advisory Committee, also known as the FCAC. That's where we start. But in our conversation, Sharon shares her own evolution as a person, along with the evolution of the marketplace and of regional grain. This story impacts you and your daily bread. It's an important story, both for where it's taken us, but also for where we can go from here. Before we start, I'm going to tell you that I almost hung up on Sharon. This conversation almost never happened.
So I love your podcast.
Thank you.
I like your voice. Yeah, your voice is lovely and you're funny and smart. So those are my favorite. Those are really critical things.
I'm going to hang up now. I'm hanging up now.
No, because I listen to a lot. I've always listened to things. And so I love listening to people talk much more than I like to talk.
I really wasn't going to hang up on her, but two things. One, I am very appreciative that Sharon is a listener and that she understands what's at stake here. I'm really glad that you're here too. And two, I'm incredulous with the depth and candor and vulnerability that Sharon shared with me as a person who prefers to listen. I have a feeling that this is a conversation you might not hear otherwise. Sharon is special. Let's dive into the Farmer and Community Advisory Committee and Sharon's role there.
I've been on the FCAC for, I think, about 10 years. I joined very self-centeredly when the FCAC, which I'd never heard of before and had only recently been formed, started talking about the baker's rule. They were going to require bakers to bake with 15% local grain. Now, there was no local grain. We never heard of local grain. It wasn't a thing. We're organic, so there was certainly no local grain that was organic. And it was really scary because the green market's really important to us. It's an important revenue stream for all of the producers that are there. But it's also, we like direct to consumer. We like to be in front of our customers and distributors are great. Don't get me wrong. Having the ability to have that sale constant is great, but there's nothing like what you said before. There's nothing like that pinch point between the producer who's out away from the city and the city, the energy of the city and the people in the city.
The pinch point, that's what I call it. When folks who live in a rural environment and folks who live in a more urban environment are pinched together and have a chance to interact in an authentic way. Urban and rural coming together. You'll hear more about this as the series develops.
I mean, I could riff off of that for a long time, both from a personal point of view. I grew up in Queens and I live up here now and have for a long time.
Sharon lives in upstate New York, where Bread Alone has various bakeries, including a new one, a carbon-neutral facility that is being built in Boyceville, about 2 hours and 20 minutes from New York City.
And so it's great to bring something and as a producer, be part of the energy of the city. But what we're bringing isn't just the product, I feel. And certainly early on in the 80s, what we're bringing was a different lifestyle. I mean, we figured out a way for us personally, live closer to the land and to produce something that we could hold in our hand that had value for other people who would support our lifestyle living outside of the city. Seems like a new idea now, but it's not. Headline. People have been doing this a long time.
Right. Yeah, people are really catching on now, though. Right?
It's amazing. It's like, what a great new idea. But I do support, I've joked, but I do also support it, So when the green market started saying, okay, Sharon and Bread Alone, you won't be able to be in the market unless you do this thing. And this thing is not, was an unknown for me. That's when I went down into a meeting, my first meeting. And it was such a great and scary experience for me. I'm again, back to the first part of our conversation. I'm a listener. Like I'm Chancey Gardner. If you like the movie Being There, I like to watch. But in any case, I am very, very shy. So going to that meeting and having to speak up amongst these people, especially Michael. Michael was a big hinge for me because unlike a lot of the men in my world, and especially the hospitality in the kitchens, he really listened. And he asked me questions and he listened to the answers, and everybody in the room did. It was like everybody was quiet and listened to everybody else. It doesn't always happen that way, of course, when there's a hot topic, but I just felt like, who are these people who are Michael and June and the green market people?
As we talk, Sharon is going to mention a host of folks who work at GrowNYC. Michael Hurwitz, who we heard from in the first episode, is the director of green markets there. 52 of them, each with a life of their own. And June? June Russell is somewhat of a legend. She is at the center of the grain story. We'll talk more about her later.
And then the producers, so I didn't know all of them. I didn't know all those people. Because you're busy doing your work, you're busy baking bread, you're busy driving into the city. At that point, that's what I was doing more of, not so much now. And I just thought, like what you're asking, what is this magic that happens? It's like there was a sense from the GrowNYC people, Michael and his crew, that they were trying to create something. They were trying to create something. It wasn't just like a parking lot that we rent and producers pull up and sell their wares, which most markets are, and that's fine. And that's kind of what it was in the beginning, a little bit different because it was in New York City. But a lot of farmers markets in towns, that's what it is. They were trying to create something else, and by having rules that you were supposed to challenge and question, like collectively implement the decisions in a way that was, I just felt like it was not even democratic. It wasn't even that way. It was a third way, which I'd never experienced before. I mean, as a business person and as the leader, you make the decisions, you implement the decisions. So that was a start, and I joined, but I'm not the kind of person who can be political and go out and be like, I want to join the FCAC, but I have to have people vote for me. That was like horrifying for me. My dad was a New York City police officer. Again, I grew up in Queens. My dad was a New York City police officer, Irish Catholic, 7 kids. That was my world. Knew nothing about anything, how anything grew or how the world worked. But my dad was vice president of the PBA, the union, the New York City Police Patrolmen's Union. And so he always, he was a real garrulous person. People loved him. And he always had to have elections and he always won. So I decided that I was going to run for office at the FCAC, and I lost. It was awful. I felt terrible about myself, but I loved the meetings so much that I said, I don't care. They're open to everybody. I'm just going to attend the meetings because it's interesting to me. And then I started taking notes, because when you're an introvert, taking notes is just kind of what you do so that nobody talks to you. Right? Right. So I started taking the notes, which has a value. There's a value to having the information commemorated in writing. So, and that's all I want to do. I just want to add value. So the next election cycle, 3 years later, I got a seat. I won. I felt so good about myself. Of course, I should say there was like 3 openings and there was only 3 people running. So I sort of had to win, but I don't tell anybody that I won.
I'm not going to tell anyone that either.
Yeah, nobody has to know that. So some meetings are boring, but then some some of the topics were really interesting, and then people would get violations for not following the rules, and then those people would come in to us, and we would have to sort of say, well, you're either going to get kicked out of the market, or you're going to have to, change your ways, and how can we help support you to change your ways, because the green market's a really important economic force for producers, really important. So, it's like real issues. And sometimes people would just be like so overwhelmed by their life that they couldn't uh they couldn't produce good reports. And I totally can relate to that. I mean, there's a time in my life when it would have been a terrible thing if the inspector had come to look at our reports. We would have been in real trouble. And so I could like totally relate to that, and feel like versus other people who are like scamming the system. They would come to the meetings, and it's like, you know, I'm a cop's daughter, so I have a BS radar. So I'd be like, yeah, something's just, I'm just not buying what he's selling. I'm just not. Of course, I wouldn't say that to him. I'd be very polite, and if I had to ask a question, because sometimes you had to, or I would just be like, "Oh my God, I have to ask this question." Okay, how am I going to steady my voice so I can ask this question? So it's like in the 10 or 11 years that I've been on the FCIC, I have grown so much in my confidence, because in my own little world, like I'm a mom, 4 kids, now I have grandchildren. I'm a boss, my business, 30 years. It's like I was really challenged to have to like sort of, I don't know, prove my, not prove, but like make my case. And for me personally, it's been such a growing experience.
Go back
Yeah.
for me for a second what you said about Michael, and you felt like they weren't just having a meeting, that they were really trying to do something. What were they trying to do?
Well, I didn't know for a long time. And for a while there, I was like, they have like a socialist agenda. Like I was like, they have all these like, ways that they're trying to like, I didn't never heard the phrase food desert.
A food desert is a geographical area where fresh food isn't readily available or affordable. That's the simple definition, but you know how everything is complicated. We talked about this in the episode featuring farmer Kamal Bell at Sankofa Farms in North Carolina, Season 4, Episode 2. The real definition of a food desert lies in why an area might be a food desert. We'll talk about this again, but I just wanted to put a pin in it here.
I'm a for-profit bakery with family business, and my father was a cop, so I never really understood that. So I had a well, this racism, now I can understand that I was raised in a racist environment because I was raised in a cop family in the 60s. So you kind of can't get away from that. And so I never really thought about why people living in a food desert, like what a food desert was, and why people who are, disadvantaged or economically challenged, like why they live like that. Like that was my, where I was coming from. And I didn't understand why they were like, why would they try to open a market in an area where people couldn't afford the food at the market? Like, why would they even try that? Oh, so okay, so that doesn't work. And they would want, we, of course, were like, okay, you want to open a market here. We want to be in as many markets as possible because we were growing. So we would do it. And then we would be like, losing money. We'd be throwing bread out. We'd be, it was hard to get to the market. How do we get there? So that's what I mean. It's like I didn't know at the time that was what they were trying to do. After the markets and food deserts wasn't working out, they tried food box, which was putting in a refrigerated box at a bodega for the farmers market products to go into. I was like, that's crazy. Why would you put that much effort into something? It just seems like that's never going to work. And of course, it didn't work. And I felt like, of course, it didn't work. It's not a good business idea, because there's this whole other part of helping of feeding people, of taking care of the entire society, that it just wasn't on my radar. I mean, and I don't think it was on a lot of producers' radar. So I think a lot of the producers scratch their heads and say, well, that's Michael. That's this whole other thing that we're just a little tiny part of as producers. But for me personally, I mean, it's educated. I've gotten an education, and I'm a little embarrassed to say it out loud to you here right now, but I'm also, it's like, this is the truth.
Explain the education. Like now, what do you understand?
They didn't used to do this, but when Cheryl started to report on the food bucks, on EBT, on SNAP, and food stamps, first it was food stamps, I was surprised. I was surprised that there were so many people that at the market who were on food stamps. So this is, 12 years ago. And I was surprised that she was reporting on it. Like, it's not something we report on. It's not something that I personally see in my area. Of course, I wasn't looking. I wasn't looking at, I wasn't looking outside of the boundaries of um, uh, my own ambition and my own life, really. Privileged that way. Yay me. But also, I didn't have this language. I have this language now because it's 2021. If you don't have this language, you have your head under a rock and you need to be educated, in my opinion. And it just ramped up from there. I just started realizing that, like, oh, they have an agenda. They have this whole other agenda that the farmers market, well, at first I was like, the farmers market is subsidizing this. Like, our fees are subsidizing this. Are we okay with this? Like, are we? And for me, I was like, okay, well, am I okay with this? I had to really think about it. I had to really think, am I okay with my fees subsidizing it, just in order to not be in the netherland of it, just not be blah or vague about it. And I was like, what they're doing is really positive. It's really great. It's New York City. You see when they would share photos of especially the youth market. The youth market is the thing that really got me. You see photos of these young people who didn't know how to cook or eat, or why you would grow cauliflower. And I was that kid. It's like, I was that kid. My parents, we had, everything was frozen, everything was out of a can. I was really lucky that I lived next to an Italian family, as my father would say, right off the boat. They spoke Italian, and they grew everything in their backyard. And I grew up in Queens Village, a little tiny backyard, the fence. So our yard with 7 kids, 4 boys, was just dirt, just packed down dirt and a basketball court. And their yard was this like utopia of greenery and tomatoes and herbs. And it's like, I'm that kid. I was like, I'm gonna cry. I'm that kid. Like, what is like what? So what is that? And why isn't that here? And what would you do with it if you did have it here? I don't even know what it means. Again, I'm one of 7. I was very quiet. I had a very rambunctious family, and I would cook. I learned to cook really early. I learned to bake really early. My first things to bake were pretzels from a recipe off of Zoom.
She's not talking about the Zoom that we use to talk and to see each other over the computer. She's talking about the kids' show that originally ran on PBS from 1972 to 1978. It was devoid of adults and encouraged kids to turn off the TV and just do it. So Sharon wrote them for a pretzel recipe.
I did that. I put it in the mailbox, and I got the recipe back, and I made pretzels, which were over yeasted and over salted and under baked and underproofed. I'm just like, no, know that now. But I was the hit of my family because I would spend my Friday nights making pretzels. So I see these pictures of these kids once a year, though, because they would report on dry statistics, how many SNAP, how many youth markets. But then at the annual meeting, would show pictures of the kids at the youth market who were having that same experience that I had. But the green market was providing it, like actively providing it, going out and doing outreach to provide it, and not in a white lady way, which is my favorite thing to say, but in a way that, like at first they did. Yes, at first they did it in, again, I'm calling it the white lady way, where they marched into the projects, that's what we call them, and set up a table and set up a tent and pretty much told the producers they had to do it because if you want to be in the good market, you have to play along. And it was so looking back now, so tone deaf, right? I mean, but they realized it. They didn't just say, oh, that doesn't work. We're going to go back to the Upper East Side and create a market in the Upper East Side. They said, okay, well, okay, let's try this. Let's try food boxes. Oh, let's try this. Let's try that. And they kept trying stuff. Again, subsidized partly by it's like, I don't even want to say subsidized isn't probably the right word. It's like we're part of their system. So we get it's like we're part of that system. So yeah, if you're part of the system, you should know about the system, and you should either celebrate the system or try to change the system. So all that learning for me has just been foundational.
Do you think that other members of the FCAC, do you think they've had similar aha moments as you have over the last 10 years?
I think they've had aha moments, but I think some of them are probably like, not happy about it, because some of them might have a different political view. I definitely have a different political view, and are like, that's got nothing to do with us. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with us. That's not how we roll. I know, like, when the Farm Bill came up, of course, the Farm Bill had not really affected me in my life, so I didn't really understand the importance of it. Again, at the Greenmarket, at the FCAC meeting, we have one of the community members follows all the legislation and reports on it every month. Super interesting. So when the Farm Bill came up and there was a lot of momentum from downstate legislators to enact the overtime law, the farmers were flipping out, like really upset about that, because margins are really tight.
We are going to hear from farmers later in the series about the legislative implications of immigration law, including the overtime rule. But for now, let's just focus ourselves on how, from Sharon's perspective, the Farm Bill issues illustrate how the Greenmarket represents farmers with all different viewpoints.
So, a lot of the farmers use migrant workers. And so there's like, you provide housing, you provide room and board, but there's an expectation that the workers coming up will work a lot, right? Harvest time, it's going to be 14, 15, 16-hour days, sometimes days on a row, sometimes you won't have a day off. And that's just like part of the system. And there's a rate, but it's no overtime. And so the migrant workers will come up here, work for a period of time, send the money back, and then go back. According to some of the farmers, happy with the system. The system's working fine. But a lot of downstate legislators who aren't farmers and who don't have farmers as their constituents were very aggressive and kind of spoke down to those farmers from upstate who are, a bunch of hillbillies and who don't care. They're taking advantage of the migrant workers. They're taking advantage of they're slave drivers. I've not thought about that before. Of course, because I pay overtime. Of course, we follow, we pay a living wage. We've always taken care of our employees and helping them to live a better life, just like we have, has been baked into into everything that we do. So, I'm not a farmer, and so I didn't have that same tracking. But it's really eye-opening, and it's not over by any stretch. Figuring out how to protect our farm workers and support our farmers, and having that be in the same sentence, that's a big work. But Greenmarket is in that conversation. They're in Albany. They're at the mayor's office. Michael's talking to them. He's on the phone with them, and putting together letters and outreach. That's part of what the FCAC and the Greenmarket does on a regular basis, way behind the scenes, and in a sensitive way, because the farmers were like, you can't send that letter. You can't send that letter supporting this bill. And some of the people who were writing letters to support the bill to protect the farm workers were really caught off guard, because they felt like this is the right thing to do. You need to support the farm workers. That's all unresolved still, of course. You know that.
It's incredible how the Union Square and other New York City green markets are at the nexus for so many issues and conversations. We will get into this labor issue in episodes with farmers as the series progresses, so stay tuned and weigh in with your thoughts and questions. I know you've got them.
But to your question, I don't know if other people have had that aha moment. I don't know. I have shared my aha moments, but I can think a little overly deeply about things sometimes. So I don't know.
When you first were motivated to get involved in the FCAC, it was really about, it was a nexus of two things. One, rules, and two, your inability to follow those rules and still be a producer in the market because of the lack of availability of grain or organic grain. There's a grains story here. You started in this on this
Yes.
city, and you're like, yeah, we can't actually fulfill those rules. It's not possible. So what's happened?
When the market started in the early 80s, or it might have been 79, I
70s.
can't remember. Barry Benepe, who's a neighbor and a friend, he had this great idea. He got it going, but he didn't manage it. He hired these two gentlemen to manage it. And gentlemen is a stretch because they were kind of rough characters. And they did not do a very good job of managing the market. The market kept going, but they were kind of thuggish. There's not a better word to put it. They were kind of thuggish. There's a couple of funny stories, but the point I want to make is that, at that point, before Michael and his crew came on, like you could buy bananas at the market. You could buy oranges at the market.
Remember what Aquilino Cabral told us in episode 1? Regional food only. Food you grow only. Or food you make with what you grow. Or in some cases, what other regional farmers grow. There are rules.
Farmers were buying apples and pears and broccoli from a distributor and selling it at the market. So that there was no rules. And if these two gentlemen were fans of yours, they let you do things and let you into markets. And if they weren't fans of you, they made your life a living hell. And so that wasn't sustainable. That wasn't cool. That wasn't what the producers at the market, who are real honest people who are trying to make a living, weren't digging that at all. So when the rules came that, okay, you can only sell what you grow, you can't buy stuff in, it has to be regional, but also grown by you. The farmers are like, okay, we're gonna do that. But then after a few years, once the FCAC started, they were like, well, what about the bakers? Like they don't have to follow any of these rules. They can buy flour from wherever they want, and they're standing right there, and there's like no seasonality to flour, so they're always there with their cookies and their bread, and it's not fair. You got to do something. So that was the genesis of it. And once I knew that was the genesis of it, I was like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Like we are here because the farmers are here. We wouldn't be here if the farmers weren't here. And so we're sort of beholden to the farmers. It's like we're you know we're really dependent on them. Shocking, right? Big reveal. We're dependent on the farmers. But it's sort of a two thing, because we're dependent on the farmers to grow our grain, but we're dependent on the farmer, and we're dependent on the farmers at the farmers market in order to draw a crowd all year long. And we are as the bakers, we are the stable force. So we're like a cornerstone, but without them, there wouldn't be a market. Without us, it would be hard for the market to have the same vibrancy throughout the year. So the reason was great. And there was an appetite already for farmers to grow grain. Some farmers to grow grain, like Tor Oshner at Farmer Ground.
Farmer Ground Flour is the shared project of millers Greg Rousseau and Neil Johnston, an organic farmer, Tor Oshner. They grow grain in the Finger Lakes region and mill it themselves. It's a really interesting story, and we will come back to them.
Like he really got into it. So he went, smart kid from Long Island, went up to Cornell, a great mechanic. So he really got into the machinery of farming. There's nothing better for grain growing than someone who understands a machine. So he got challenged by that. So he started to grow like, oh, can you grow? Oh, yes, you can grow. Okay, I'm going to grow wheat. I'm going to grow rye. I'm going to grow whatever. Uh, but really on a small scale. And then it's like, okay, well, I have this stuff. What am I going to do with it? I don't know what to do with it. No one knows what to do with it. You have to dry it and then you have to mill it. Okay, let me try that. But it was really on that really, really, really small scale. But just like what we did in the 80s, can you bake bread? Can you bake really great fermented organic, naturally fermented organic bread in a wood oven in New York? Can you do that? I don't know. Let's try. We'll try it with one loaf. We'll try it with 100 loaves, 1,000 loaves, so on. So that level of scale was converging at the same time that June. I keep saying June, and she hates when I say that because she knows that it's the whole team. But I like to say June because she's the person that I talk to.
So here we are with June again, June Russell. She was part of the GrowNYC team with Michael Hurwitz and spearheaded the Small Grains Project. She really dove into the details of it and, with her team at GrowNYC, made big changes in the regional production of grain and locally available flour. Here's Michael Hurwitz, Director of Green Markets at GrowNYC, from episode 1 on June and a peek into what happened to grain on her watch and why it matters to you.
A colleague of mine, June Russell, she's a force and just an encyclopedia of regional agriculture. But she came in as the inspector right around the same time I came in as the director. Our baked goods at the time did not reflect our mission and our values, and that we could really up our game so that those baked goods could, one, be a showcase of regional agriculture, but also be a driver of regional agriculture, right? Regional grains is, from a mission perspective, it's about new opportunities for farmers to bring product in and for us to educate consumers why local grain is as important as a local tomato. It's about building organic matter in soil structure, which is vital in terms of crop yield, of drought resistance, of flood resistance. You want to talk about regenerative agriculture, legumes and grains are at the epicenter of that. And you want to talk about carbon farming, we're talking about grains. June spent a couple of years actually traveling the landscape and getting a real sense of who's doing what infrastructure exists, where the infrastructure investments are needed, and played matchmaker and brought processors together with millers and grain growers and bakers and farmers. And over 2 years, we worked with our community to create the rule, and it started with 15%, and that grew to 25%.
So June was like, okay, this is happening in upstate New York. And not surprisingly, fast forward a decade, it's happening everywhere in the world. Like everywhere you go, farmers are growing grain again, and not the industrial complex farmers. We tried that. We tried the military complex, industrial complex farming to feed people, and there's problems with it. So it's like collectively around the globe, like-minded people started thinking, okay, what's the one thing that we've always eaten as human beings? And the reason that we started to gather together in groups, grain. Shocking that we had forgotten about that, pushed it to the middle of our country so it could grow a monoculture. I meditate on it a lot. I don't know why there has this collective switch, but for us, the Back to the Land movement, that was a big motivator for us to like understand how to feed yourself, understand how to provide value to your community, how to treat your business, how to grow your business in a way that's sustainable and righteous, cooking all the boxes. I feel like this is just an extension of that. Once I understood that, this is just an extension of my personal work from me as a kid looking at the Italian neighbors. I just jumped into it with both feet and tried to understand like how we at Bread Alone, how our buying power could help the struggling infrastructure of small grain growing in our area.
So what does that look like, that buying power? What can the buying power of Bread Alone do? Sharon explains.
I remember we wanted to get grain from Farmer Ground. And Farmer Ground's in Trumansburg in Ithaca, but there was no distributor. there's no way to get the product from point A to point B. So I would drive up in our truck and pick up 3 pallets. So a pallet is 2 tons, so 6 tons of of their really poorly milled grain. I mean, because we've been working with professional millers for decades, so we know what stone ground, organically grown millers that work with agronomists, because the agronomists help the farmers figure out the problems with growing organically and figure out how to help the farmer pick the right seeds. And for organics, it's all about what inputs, when you do the inputs, and some grains require different inputs. When I started to become like, what is this local grain? What is this grain? I have to know everything. Like, we can grow grain in our area, and we can, use grain that's grown in our area. I thought we could only use grain that was grown in the Midwest. Like, I really did think that.
That's the hard work. Sourcing grain locally meant digging in, picking up grain, dealing with a poorly milled product for your own precious product until it could be better. Sharon put in time, loaves and loaves of bread, testing, retesting, trying again and again, getting there, working with everyone.
Cornell has done, and they do this with all their seed things. They were, doing a seed trials. They do seed trials all the time, right? They pretty much only do resistance to pesticides, yield, and that they not for taste and not for taste or bakeability. So June and a few other people put together a panel of bakers and agronomists and millers to choose a seed variety, grow a seed variety, and then process a seed variety, and then bake with the seed variety, and then do taste tests on those seed varieties, so that farmers could be educated on which grain to grow in our area, because that information had gone bye with when wheat production got moved to the Midwest. Super interesting. Like, I had no idea of any of this stuff. So I am now on my third 3-year grain trial team. I'm the baker. So I'm the person that, like, I get the flour and I assess the flour as a baker. Like, how does it perform? How much does it absorb? How does it taste after we bake it? How extensible is it? Can it go into a machine? Can it not go into a machine? Does it make a good pancake? Does it make a good brioche or whatever? So that was really interesting.
And connecting all of that trial and error with the farmers and the millers and even the scientists, the agronomists. GrowNYC and June and Sharon with Bread Alone made those connections, and all of those connections have an impact locally and regionally.
Even Mark Sorrells, who's like a world famous wheat breeder from Cornell, when I made bread and I made cookies, and we had a whole convening, and we talked through the different flavors and what performed well in the bowl and what baked well and what didn't bake well. And he took a bite of the bread, and he said he'd never tasted anything that he had bred before. Never. I was like, well, nobody could believe it. I mean, he said it in front of everybody, so we were all like, what? That's the whole point.
It's the whole point, right?
Yes, the whole point. Yeah. So you see what I mean? It's like there's so many shiny parts to this. And this is the green market. This is like this is our landlords. Like, if you could just, like, I'm sure some people just like, these are our landlords. We pay them a fee. We pull up to the parking lot. We sell our stuff. We leave. That's it. I don't want to know anything else. And that's fine, because the market has to be very diverse. Yeah.
But they're participating in something that nobody knows about.
Right.
People walk up into that market. They're like, yeah, I want to get some fresh leeks because I'm going to make this. And I got to go. I'm going to pay for it and I'm going to get out of here. They don't know.
No. And, we're so connected. We're really so connected. And so picking that one leek, you're pulling on so much mycelium or whatever it is.
You're in the dirt. You're with human beings. You're with agronomists and and scientists and people who know how to work machinery. And
Yeah, and you're in the past, you're 10,000 years ago, when people first said, hey, this grain, not this stuff on the top of this green thing tastes really good. And I feel smarter when I eat it. And you're connected to them, because if that information had not gotten passed down to you, you'd be out there eating that probably.
when
So
you say,
thank you, person 18,000 years ago.
yes. So when you say you can draw a line between, this and anything, I mean, I feel like, right? Like these are lines. These are all lines. They're really there. And well, I don't know. I guess I kind of feel like that's my job.
Yes, thank you. Because I would like to know, you asked a question. I'm like, I don't know. I would like to know if some of the other producers, feel the way that I do. Like, how could they not? Right?
We will spend the next several weeks talking to farmers and producers who sell at Union Square Greenmarket. They come from as far away as Vermont. They fish in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They provide over 12,000 ingredients to chefs and home cooks. They are involved in conversations, the ones that pinch rural and urban communities together. We will find out what they think, how they make ends meet, how they innovate, and how their work impacts the regional food system. What do they think about the governance of the market? What do they think about the questions that you have? I would love to hear what you're thinking. Reach out. Get your questions heard. Farmers want to know what you're thinking too. You can find me on Instagram at XOXOFarmGirl or via the Talk Farm to Me website. Thanks so much for tuning in. I have the best job in the world. I get to talk with the most interesting people, farmers and producers. We talk about their passion points and how they intersect with important issues about your food, your land, your regional economic food network. I think it's important. But I want to leave you with Sharon and her perspective.
There's so much to the work that you and I are doing. There's just so much to it. I'm glad that you're doing this. It really is important for people to understand not just the growing, but then once you grow, you got to do something with it. And how do we feed people in a way that honors everybody? And the green market's such a great resource. You've struck a rich ore.
Thank you.
You have struck a rich ore.
Hey, thank you. I'll take that metaphor. I really will.
No one's done a story like this. Yeah.
Well, here we go.
I know you join me in thanking Sharon for showing up, for doing her extraordinary and perpetual work, her best, for sharing, for being a person who prefers to listen and shared so much about herself, her life, and her work at Bread Alone, and with the Farmer and Community Advisory Committee at GrowNYC. And from me to you, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for participating in Talk Farm to Me as we pinch together urban and rural, farmers and non-farmers. This is an important conversation, and it is nothing without you. I'm your host, Farm Girl. Stay tuned for episode 3 next week. And don't forget to reach out to me with any questions or thoughts on Instagram at XOXOFarmGirl or via talkfarmtome.com. Talk Farm with you soon.